Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, February 18th, 2025, and today we are going to be making a 2026 Senate election prediction. Now, before this video gets started, I wanted to say that I might sound a little bit different. I have a pretty interesting cough going around my college campus quite a bit. So if I sound a little bit different or a little bit off, that is the reason why. If you're wondering why I'm making a 2026 video, this is probably the real question you're asking. Well, one, I would say every time there's an election cycle coming up, I always do one almost immediately after the previous election cycle concludes. In fact, I probably should have made this video back in January, but I think it'll be interesting to see how the progression of the races really unfold over the coming next year and a half. Some interesting metrics, looking back at historical elections. Sometimes my prediction right after, someone is inaugurated as president or a midterm cycle ends up being the most accurate prediction of the cycle. So it's really interesting to see that throughout the next 2 years, and we've seen over the past 6 years since I've been covering midterm elections and presidential elections and just general elections in total, is that very often some of these earlier predictions do show insights into what might end up being trend lines later down the line, whether that means more competitive races, less competitive races, and just generally what the vibes are for the next 2 years as we go full force into the midterm elections. So 2026, we have 35 seats up as of right now, barring any type of unexpected retirements or anything that would complicate the Senate system further, but we have 35 toss-up seats right now. Democrats hold 34, meaning they're not up for re-election. Republicans hold 31. But don't let this number with the slight Democratic advantage fool you. This video is going to be primarily discussing, where the best odds are of flips for both sides of the aisle and what the map looks like today. If I was to call it now, given where Trump's approval rating is, given where we were in the last election, what it would likely break down by pretty much across the board when it comes down to the Senate races. Now, to give you a bit of insight into, my thinking here, we always start off with the safe states. And so these are states that in the last presidential election were 15 points or more for one political party, that in previous Senate elections really have no chance and had no chance of flipping back and forth between Democrat and Republican. And so that means states like Oregon are going to be solid for the Democratic Party. States like Illinois are going to be solid for the Democratic Party. Delaware, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. And, although I did see the competitive nature of New Jersey in the last cycle, I will say this, looking at it ahead in 2026, when it comes down to what Democrats are expecting, it is certainly not a competitive race. And, although it might have been narrow on the presidential, things often revert back in a midterm cycle, especially with a Republican president. And even though Donald Trump is enjoying an approval rating that is, strong, I will say a lot of these states at their core partisan value, removing Donald Trump from the equation, who's been in the equation arguably for the past 10 years on the presidential level. These states traditionally are Democratic states. Massachusetts did have a Republican senator as recently as 2013, right? But that doesn't mean the state is not safe blue, especially when it comes down to some of their more congressional elections with the incumbents across the board. All of the Democratic incumbents are seemingly running for re-election, barring a few. We'll talk about that in a video either later today or tomorrow. So that brings the Democrats to roughly 40 right now. A new retirement out of Minnesota, Tina Smith, who was elected in a special election back in 2020. She's not running for a re-election this cycle. In Michigan, Gary Peters is also on his way out. So 2 swing states from the last cycle now having retiring Democratic incumbents. But everywhere else across the board, Democrats are pretty hopeful that it should be, pretty strong for them when you're looking at what made them so strong in 2022 in the face of Republicans supposedly going to have a wave was that they had a whole number of Democrats stay in the races. The only single state where there was a retirement from a Democrat on the Senate level was in Vermont. And besides that, all of the other Democrats in the swing races really held strong. I think there's now, a bit of a culture shift in that Democrats are expecting 2026 to go well, so they're retiring in states that they might otherwise need to worry about with incumbents that they don't necessarily think they need to worry about right now. But given the national environment, I would always caution and err on the side of caution in that incumbents, if they are not at a point where they truly want to leave but are just, doing it for the sake of, I think that the party might benefit from this or that I'm afraid of losing re-election. There are times at which, sometimes for the sake of your party, you run for re-election. I think a lot of Republicans were probably unhappy with Pat Toomey when he decided to retire, and then eventually John Fetterman won that seat. And given that, the circumstances of the national environment might have been better had Republicans had a better candidate, not only in Pennsylvania, but across the board, maybe if Pat Toomey was running, he would have been able to win. But again, people are always free to leave. I mean, politicians are free and independent in that right. And so when they're leaving, There's always going to be dynamics at play as to why that is. As of right now, I think it's in anticipation that Democrats will largely be okay in these races. But again, very competitive races in Minnesota and Michigan in the last presidential, both of them decided by less than 5 points. Be interesting to see how it votes this time around. Now, Cory Booker, like I said, I don't really expect to be close, but it will be interesting to watch. In 2020, he had a pretty substantial margin, roughly 18 points. New Jersey did revert in 2024 to being much closer to a swing state rather than a safe state. But again, I will say, in midterm elections, especially with the Republican incumbent, I don't imagine New Jersey will be that inclined to swing there. So enough talking about those states. Let's continue to take a look. There are 2 states in particular that I'm interested in when I characterize them potentially as safe. Right now, with John Hickenlooper as the incumbent senator in Colorado, given it's going to be a Trump midterm and given where we are nationally, I agree with that characterization. In New Mexico, I'm a bit less convinced that it's going to be a race that is, locked down and solid for the Democratic Party, given what happened in 2020. I made the mistake of assuming that Mark Ronchetti would not be in a strong position in this race. He had taken on some more liberal policies, tried to adapt to be more, pro-science. I mean, that was his whole thing, different than the National Republican Party. On one end, I think that it was right to assume that he would not win the Senate race. That's what I do think was correct. But, the Democrats here didn't do as well as they would have hoped. Now, in 2014, this race was held by Tom Udall, who also has a sibling who ran for Senate and lost in the same year. But looking at 2020, replacement, Ben Ray Lujan, who was at the time U.S. representative, went on to be a senator, but the margin was significantly closer than the presidential. So I'm not convinced it's going to be a safe race. It was closer in New Mexico than it was in Colorado in 2024 as well. New Mexico is roughly 6 points. Colorado is roughly 10 points, 11 points. So definitely see differences there. Not enough to characterize it as safe. Virginia is the last race. I'll not waste our time because I don't think it's wasting. But the last race, I want to take a look at is Virginia when it comes down to the hypothetical safe states for the Democratic Party. Mark Warner's the incumbent. If Glenn Youngkin runs, it could be a much closer race. But as of now, given that he has not confirmed a run, it could be likely. And I think likely is the best place that we could put it. New Hampshire is going to be close. Chris Sununu, though, not running. Definitely good news for the Democratic Party. We're looking at the field of candidates is pretty slim on the Republican side. I don't imagine there's going to be many people. Scott Brown, who already lost a race in 2014, might I say, not a great performance for him. Is certainly not going to win it this time around. Running against, guess who? The same exact person. Anyways, back to the map here. So 41 seats for the Democrats. The Republicans, this is really where they shine. They are locking in across the board here in terms of safe races. Not much here for the Democrats, not much hope for them when it comes down to many of these battleground races, especially not right now. I mean, we don't see anyone who's looking to run. Mary Peltola did mention she might run for Senate, but it looks a lot more likely that she runs for governor in the state. It doesn't seem like there's going to be an interesting race in Alaska this time around. Unfortunately for the Democratic Party, as of now, it's a safe state. Texas, same thing. It was a 14-point margin for Trump. John Cornyn is roughly more popular than Donald Trump is in the state, and Ted Cruz, and even then Ted Cruz won by roughly 9 points in the last cycle. John Cornyn's going to run, and he is more than likely going to win. But it'll be interesting to watch because Democrats might have, a stellar candidate like they did that one time with Beto O'Rourke. But as of now, I would say I would lock in. If I was to look at it objectively from the Republican standpoint, I would say, I'm pretty locked in here if I was, running their campaign. The next state to look at is Iowa. Now, historically has been very close. Joni Ernst had a close race in 2020. By close, I mean 6 points. Not really close in the modern era, but there could be some interesting races here. Democrats are hoping to field a strong candidate, but I do believe, as of now, given where we are with our national environment, given where we were in 2024, this race is going to be likely red. So Iowa, Ohio, this is 2022, but I mean, you can even see it too. Chuck Grassley, 12 points. Ohio, J.D. Vance, 6 points. And that was supposed to be a bad performance for the Republicans. But in 2024, Ohio, Bernie Moreno won by 4 on the presidential level, though. Ohio by 11 and Iowa by 13 points. So I'm going to say Joni Ernst slightly underperforms Trump. I think it's going to be a likely red state. I think Ohio is also going to be a likely red state, and that's it. That's the ballgame, right? Trump already, and the Republicans, win a Senate majority right here, right now. Now, Democrats can counteract that, right? They're going to win by a likely margin in New Hampshire. They're going to win by a likely margin in New Mexico. I also think the same in Minnesota. Annie Craig planning to run for Senate there. It looks like she might get that nomination. We'll see. Ilhan Omar also might want to run. That could really, really do in Democrats, I think, in that race. When it comes down just to, who has been underperforming, Democrats at the top of the ticket consistently. But right now, Minnesota, likely blue. New Mexico, likely blue, asterisks on that Minnesota part. Virginia, definitely likely blue as of right now. Glenn Youngkin gets into the race. Could be interesting. I still don't think he has it. 45 for the Democrats there. Republicans at 50. And they're not done. I have to caution you and say that as well. They have incumbents in Maine, in North Carolina, and in Florida. So assuming they win all the remaining incumbent seats, which they probably, aren't going to be locked in on doing so, but if they do, it's a 53 majority already, and it's going to maintain itself as a 53 majority. Regardless, though, Democrats are hoping they can make inroads in some of these states. But the reason I say we're not done is not because of Maine or North Carolina, where the Republicans currently have incumbents in. It's because of Florida, which has, at the beginning of this channel in 2017, when I started making videos in the summer of 2017, Florida was a swing state. No doubt in my mind, and no doubt in many people's minds too. Hillary Clinton had just lost the state by a point, and it was on track to be a very competitive race in 2018, and competitive it was. It was decided by less than half a point in both the governor's race and the Senate race. 4 years later, 19-point margin for the Republicans. 2 years after that, Donald Trump wins the state by double digits, and it looks like, the Senate race there completely trounced for the Democratic Party. Not much of a difference. Rick Scott, who was a historically bad performer in Florida politics, was winning, but barely, completely underperforming a Rubio, completely underperforming other Republicans, won by a landslide. And this time around, it is absolutely no different. I don't think Democrats are going to look at this and say, maybe they will, because parties tend to do this. They are thoroughly convinced their races will be more competitive, but I will say this, there will be a much more competitive Republican primary, and, important on that part, because it will be a much more in competitive primary, because that's what really matters in this Senate race here. So it looks like that's going to be a big thing. Democratic primary is not going to be touched. Florida is going to be locked back in as a safe red state. So Republicans at 51, Democrats at 45. Now it comes down to the 4 remaining toss-up races. Now, what Democrats should be looking for is certainly not winning the Senate majority this time, and they are not doing that as of right now. If circumstances change and, someone comes into Montana and says, I'm going to shake this up as an independent, and does so, maybe, right? Hypothetical, similar to what happened in Nebraska, just that the environment across the state is a bit more beneficial to a Democratic Party candidate or aligned type of candidate, barring that, which probably won't happen. What Democrats should be working for is getting to a point where they can win the Senate majority in 2028. And that's possible. There is a mathematical way to get there. But it is exceptionally difficult because of the failures of some Senate Democrats in 2024. And I don't say, I think that sounds really harsh, but losing an election is a failure. In its own right, it is, right? Doesn't mean you can't come back. Doesn't mean you can't win, right? Democrats, Trump even, perfect example. Lost in 2020, came back, right? A lot of people saw that it wrote him off, said he can't win, did win, right? But in 2024, what I firmly believe is that some of these losses were preventable. And when you take a look at some of the races that were amongst the closest, we're certainly not expected to be amongst the closest, but we're expected to be competitive. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a state where I think, again, in its own right, is not in the place that Democrats, could have had it. I think Pennsylvania could have been a much closer race. I think Bob Casey, who had won his last election by 12 percentage points, could have won this race. So that'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out, as it does sort of doom Democrats in this cycle and potentially in 28, but the math is there. It is just so exceptionally difficult. So in moving past that point, where do I see these states ending up? Well, Susan Collins right now looks like, at least in Maine, that there is no heavy indication that she is going to retire. In fact, she declared very early on that she intends to run, roughly a week after the 2024 election. But there are a lot of Democrats here. A lot of Democrats who could do better than the 2020 margin. And a lot of Democrats, Shelley Pingree, Janet Mills, Troy Jackson, Jaron Golden, all these people who say, I'm considering running. And I think it could be a really big thing too, especially since Maine has ranked choice voting here. There won't be any type of spoiler vote for Democrats. Jared Golden probably is the most electable. Janet Mills is probably the best choice for the Democratic Party, given voting record, but also so could Shelley Pingree. So it'll be interesting to see who gets through this primary. I have no doubt in my mind Jared Golden could be the best performing Democrat, but he would not agree with Democrats on every single vote. But as of right now, given there are no declared Democrats, I think that we are at a point where Susan Collins holds a very narrow advantage. It's very hard to say that she will definitively lose an election. She has been outperforming the national Democrats and the national Republicans by quite a bit every single cycle. This will be the one that I do think ultimately she falls to, depending on the candidate. I think I could see a circumstance where, yes, Democrats get a more, progressive and locked-in vote in the Senate with nominating some of these Democrats, but at the same time, I could also see that it doesn't play out as well as Jared Golden, who has already been winning in the 2nd district and would undoubtedly win the 1st district, which would be, and it's enough to win across the state. But right now, I do think that there is a narrow advantage for the Republican Party in Maine, but heavy on that, because I think that it could very much switch to the Democrats just with the right type of candidate and also the right type of environment. Again, this is all a nowcast because Trump's approval rating is high enough that I could say Maine might still be a state Susan Collins could do well in, but still, it could flip. So, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, where do we see them going? We don't have any announcements out of the 2026 race in Georgia. I am anticipating that Brian Kemp announced that he is running. There are a lot of people, though, who do want to run. I do think that if Donald Trump is smart, he will endorse Brian Kemp. He may endorse Marjorie Taylor Greene, though I highly, highly doubt it. He knows that's a losing bid. Right now, though, I think that this race in Georgia is going to be very competitive. Democrats hold a very narrow advantage, and I say this with a lot of peace and love to both parties, that this race, I think, is going to be the closest one. Not Maine, not Michigan, not North Carolina. I think it's going to be in Georgia, and I think it's going to be very interesting to watch because Brian Kemp announced today if he was to do so, I think this would already be a red state on my map. Right now, Jon Ossoff holds that subtle advantage because there is still a strong possibility Brian Kemp does not run, that a very, whack Republican runs, ends up losing the general election because they're similar to Herschel Walker in that right that they just can't win a general. Georgia right now, I think is going to be competitive. Jon Ossoff holds a slight advantage. It's going to change over time, back and forth between Democrat and Republican, depending on who runs. Again, now cast early on, things can change. Michigan, I think Democrats, barring, again, bad candidates, a lot of asterisks here across the board, can hold on to the Senate race here. It's probably going to be a state that's going to be very, very competitive as well. But I do think, though, Democrats can hold on to it. They've historically done quite well here. And even though Donald Trump had victories here in 2016 and 2024, they are by no means the margins that Democrats have shared in the past 3 out of 4 elections. In Michigan in 2018, double digits. In 2020, they won the state by 3, more than Trump in both 2016 and 2024 combined. And might I add, Michigan in 2024, Senate race still went blue. I do believe that would be the case. And not to be boring about the map here, but I do think we'd end up with the exact same Senate composition that we have right now. But Democrats can make inroads in North Carolina and Maine. It would just take a lot. And I think North Carolina right now is similar to that of Georgia in that with the right Democrat, i.e. Roy Cooper, who probably won't announce he's taking a gig here, speaking at a university. But I will say, North Carolina with the right candidate, Georgia with the right for the Republicans might switch, right? Democrat to Republican, Republican to Democrat. It'll be interesting to watch. A very, very interesting dynamic at play across the board here. Same Senate map, but the margins matter and who runs matters. And we'll be seeing a lot of that unfold over the next 6 months as people announce their candidacies and exploratory committees and start raising money, because a lot of that will determine how these ratings fluctuate over time, because it could be an entirely different Senate map in a year and a half from today. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.